Hello and welcome to the Shane Show. I'm Shane Connick. A little over 14 months ago, the baseball world was saddened by the tragic death of Los Angeles Angels pitcher Tyler Skaggs. 7 days ago, Bleacher Report's Mirin published a story titled "What Tyler Skaggs Left Behind," which is the most that we've heard from the Skaggs family since his death. For more on this, we're going to bring in the author of that article, Mirin. Mirin, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. And so you end the story by saying, with a quote from Debbie, Tyler Skaggs' mother, saying that part of it is forgiving him for making stupid decisions, and that at the end of the day, no one has a gun to Ty's head. What do you think that she meant with that quote?
Well, I think that she has to grapple with a lot of different things at one time. There's sort of blame. Everyone is like, why did this happen? Whose fault is this? And, people want to talk about the Angels employee, Eric Kay, and what was his role? And then what was Tyler's role? Why is he taking these? So she has to sort of grapple with all of these different variables. And I think at the end, she really comes to terms with the fact that, like, although it is very complicated and there's a lot of people implicated, like, nobody forced her son to take these drugs. So she has to forgive him for doing that, because there's like, grief is not linear, and she's just at a point where she's like trying to come to terms with all of these things. And so I think that quote was really her kind of coming to terms with, like, the responsibility that's with her son.
So what made you decide to tell this story? As this is something that happened in California, which is where you are, and it was such a huge event. But what made you actually decide to go out there, speak with the family, and tell the story?
Well, it was a tragic story, and I thought I really didn't like how Tyler's whole life was reduced to a headline. So, here was this, like, very bright person, very bright player, and then he tragically dies, and all anyone can talk about is the drugs or what happened. And it's like this mystery. And I didn't feel like that validated his life. A headline can't sum up somebody's life. Somebody's worst moment can't sum up a life. So I wanted to find out, like, who is he, and what happened, and what is it like for the people closest to him to kind of live life without him. So I gave it some time. After it happened, I waited a couple months, and then I reached out. So it probably took about like 8 months to secure access. So this is something that I've been pursuing, because I just feel like in sports, like, there are stories that, like, really matter, and this is one of those that really matter. And it was less about being an investigative report about, like, let me find out the minute by minute details of what happened, and more about, like, what is the impact of him, the life he lived, and now the life that those that love him have to live without him.
And as journalists, we know that a lot of times, even if you want to tell the story, and even if you're trying to find out why, it's also on the other end to be receptive. And you said that it took about 8 months for you to really be able to secure access and get this thing done. Did you think that you were going to be able to get in touch with the family the way you did and be able to speak with Carly, his wife, and Debbie, his mother, and all the other people that you spoke with, friends of him and people close to him? Did you think that you were going to be able to get in touch with all those people?
I mean, I definitely didn't. I think the story felt lost for many months. And then when COVID happened, I was like, now it's really not going to happen, because I can't see them. Even if they said yes, I couldn't, go up to them. Because at the beginning of the pandemic, we were all just, social distancing meant actually social distancing. I don't know what people are doing now. But so it felt like this is impossible. But I kept following up. Because the story mattered to me. And it was like probably June-ish when the lawyer was like, I don't think this is going to happen. The investigation is still going on. It's still fresh. Like, the anniversary is in July. So I kind of just kept following up, thinking that it wasn't going to happen. But again, like, as a journalist, you have to put your best foot forward. If you care about a story, you have to chase it relentlessly. So that's what I did. And when they finally said yes, it was my first socially distanced interview. So I went to their home. That was a little scary. I haven't done an in-person interview since March. And I haven't, hung out with friends or did anything. So it was different, but I was really glad that they said yes.
Did you think that that added another whole layer to the weirdness and the sadness of this whole story, that not only are you trying to speak with them, but I remember you said at one point, you even, said multiple times throughout the article that Carly, you said, I think Carly managed to say something, she managed to say something with them, through her mask. And, you're not only are you telling this sad, tragic story with other people telling this story as you ask them the difficult questions, does it add another layer of just weirdness to this whole thing that now everyone's sitting there with masks on, staying away from each other too?
Yeah, it was really weird. I was definitely terrified the whole time because I've been seeing my parents throughout this time and they're older. And, I basically maintain with them, like, you guys aren't going to see anyone and I'm not going to see anyone. And therefore we can maintain in our 3-person bubble. But of course, seeing the Skaggs family was moving outside of that bubble. So I was really afraid of, like, what if I catch it and then I give it to my parents? And so I was weighing a lot of things. But my parents were like, you know what, this story means a lot to you, go for it. So I did that. And also, like, it was just a really hard interview. Like, anyone knows that when you're talking about a subject matter like this, you're not going to get to a quote like the gun in the first 10 minutes. You're barging in on somebody's grief, on their life, and it's really hard to gain that trust and intimacy, especially when there's like a physical distance, like sometimes when you're sitting with the subject and you're talking about a close thing, you're sitting across the table at a restaurant or something. There's like an immediate closeness there. This was like, you guys are on that end, I'm over here. Even things like opening their wedding books, I wanted to touch the photos and I just couldn't touch the photos. So it was just little things like that. And like, wanting to like trail behind Carly and listen to her as she pointed to each thing, but not being able to touch each thing myself was different. So, it's weird, it's different, but I've actually been encouraged. Like, it's still possible to have intimacy and closeness in a distant interview. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was terrified what would happen to my stories because they're so much dependent on close person-to-person access. So I've been pleasantly surprised by how it's gone.
You write that this happens often, the needing to rescue herself from reliving the worst. Every time she takes a walk, turning each corner, she imagines him there. Then she's betrayed by the inevitable emptiness, the cool air lapping at her ankles as she walks at home alone. She can't allow herself to keep thinking, to go there, that dark place. When you're speaking with these people, and obviously I know you've been saying a lot about it now, but stuff like that, the way that they are the way that they're saying it, the way that they're acting it, and you're distant, just how difficult was it to be able to get them to actually explain these things? Because once you're with them, obviously, they're going to be more inclined to say certain things. But was it just extremely difficult to actually have to be the one asking those questions in the story like this?
It was extremely difficult. I think for the first half of the interview, the first like 40 minutes, it was just kind of like raw emotions. So, when you're going into something like this, you kind of have to realize for them, they're trying to suss out who you are. They're trying to like be authentic with you, but also it takes time. So for the first half, it was just a lot of tears, to be honest. Carly started crying before the interview started. So I think already it was tense before it even started. So I think it's like, as a reporter, the biggest thing you can do is have empathy and understand that, like, you're probably not going to get to the meat of your questions until time goes on and you develop trust. And I think the cadence of the interview was like cry and then laugh at a memory. And there was a thing that I wrote in the piece that talked about that. And it was like cry, laugh. And I think once I understood the cadence and once they felt free enough to, be their truest selves and sort of vacillate between the light and the dark, that's when I was able to ask those questions. And, even though you are essentially intruding into somebody's trauma and grief, you have to ask those questions. It was really painful and hard to ask, like, did you know? What did you know? So you really didn't know at all? It's hard to ask those questions because I think sometimes in them, they sound accusatory when they're not. You're just trying to like find out information. You're not trying to blame them. You're not trying to judge them. And so I think as a reporter, you want to hedge your questions by saying like, look, I just want to find out more. And I think like it took a lot of vetting to get the interview, to say my intentions, which were just, I just want to know who your son was. I want to know him. And I think when you're honest about your intentions for the piece, the subjects can better understand, like, really, like, what are you after here?
Obviously, you have to say that the cause of his death was from an overdose of opioids and alcohol, which doesn't necessarily tell you nearly all about Tyler, as you conveyed. He was a great person, was very well liked, as you said, many people's best friend specifically. So with that said, obviously it was as tough as it was, and we've established how tough it was to have to talk to his wife and his mother about these things. But what about all the other people who you spoke with, between the Heineman brothers and people who were just close with him, people, his teammates, and other people who he interacted with? When you were to ask about this particular aspect of him.
Yeah, most people cried during the interviews with the secondary sources as well. They have their own grief too. They've lost their best friend, and it's hard for them to reconcile too. So I think all of the interviews had that theme of like, how can I live my life without this person? How can I continue to wrap my head around what has happened when I'm still so shocked that it's happened? So I think they're all still very raw in their process. I think this profile would be a little different if I waited 2 years. I don't know what's better or worse, but I think like I just saw them going through it as well. And that's the thing, like, it's very important to talk to as many people as you can. For long form stories, you want to talk to 20 plus people. It's not enough to just talk to 4 people. You have to really fight for every anecdote. You have to really, you have to be committed. You have to be relentless in your pursuit of details. You have to, your heart has to be in it. And my heart like was very in it. It's always in it. But what I mean by that is like, there has to be a sincerity with your chase. You can't half-ass a story like this. You have to be very interested and very committed, even when, it's hard for your subjects to talk to you, and bring that compassion to them. Like, of course it's hard for them to talk to me. Like, they're still grieving. And if you can be sensitive to that and understanding of that, then you're more relating human to human. You're having a conversation between 2 people, not journalist and subject.
Before Tyler's death, I know you're from Los Angeles, and the Angels are obviously a local team around there playing in Anaheim. Were you an Angels fan, and did you have an opinion or know anything about Tyler or know him at all personally before this?
I definitely wasn't a fan. Like, baseball is not my thing. I started at the Orange County Register though. And so I went to a couple Angels games like for work. And so I think I did a story, and I actually spoke with Eric Kay. This was like, God, I graduated college in 2013. This was probably like 2014, 2015. So I think I did. I mean, it was not like a large memory. I just remember because he was the PR person. So I remember having like contact with him, but I didn't know him. I didn't know anything about him. I was on the college beat. So I was doing Cal State Fullerton baseball. So that was like the local Orange County college. So I wasn't really doing pro sports at the time, but obviously when you're in Orange County, like, you're aware of the Angels. The bus stop that I used to, not the bus stop, the train, I used to take the train from LA to Orange County, and the Anaheim stop would be right in front of Angel Stadium. So I was very conscious of this. And I think when the Tyler thing happened, as an LA person, like, it just shook everyone. I can't even describe it. I mean, it shook the nation, but it's like, I don't know, it was very regional. It was very painful because he was from Santa Monica High School. And I grew up in LA, and I've of course been to Santa Monica a bunch of times. It was really strange to have it in your backyard like that.
I can imagine. And you have also written many other feature stories for Bleacher Report before, but a lot of different types of stories, including covering the Balls when they were in Lithuania. How much more difficult was it to cover a story of such weight and such importance and such sadness versus compared to the other stories that were serious, but a completely different type of serious that you had done?
Yeah, I think they're different, like you said. But I don't shy away from emotional stories. Earlier this year, I profiled the late Gigi Bryant, and that was getting 30 interviews in the midst of grief, like 2 weeks after it happened. A year before that, I did a story on a 13-year-old football player that committed suicide. And I think the reason that I picked these stories is because, like, I consider like writing's my biggest passion. Like I consider writing art. Like this is my art. And I think art reflects society. So you can't write about society if you're not writing about painful things. Like a lot of people said to me, like, wow, you chose to end it on the note of the gun in the Tyler Skaggs story. And I'm like, it's not a happy story. You can't tie this in a bow. Some stories, some parts of life just can't be tied up neatly. Like it's painful. And I think as a writer, you have a responsibility to tell a range of stories. And I think the thread through my work, though, whether it's the balls or this, Tyler Skaggs, is trying to focus humanity, trying to figure out who somebody is, what motivates them, what they're going through. I like to think that I write about people and not sports. I write about people who happen to play sports, but I'm not really writing about sports. I'm writing about people. So there were painful moments in LaMelo's life in Lithuania and in Australia, and trying to get closer to his pain really helped me get to know him. And so I think I'm using the same strategies through all of these stories, even though they have different arcs.
That's a great point you make, that you're covering people and not necessarily covering sports, but you're covering people and telling people's stories. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today and telling the story about the story, covering such an important storyline in sports.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into this edition of The Shane Show. We'll see you next time. Catch you on the flip side.